Hey everyone, and welcome back to Chat Like a Native. Today we're diving into something that I know a lot of you guys out there struggle with, and that's English grammar.
Oh, yeah.
Don't worry, this isn't going to be some boring lecture on rules.
Right.
We're going to be looking at how to personalize your grammar learning so it actually sticks.
Yeah.
We'll be diving into, things like building on what you already know. We'll talk about how to make a grammar journal and even how to turn your mistakes into learning opportunities.
Oh, cool.
So if you're ready to, move past just memorizing verb conjugations and start using grammar confidently, like in real conversations, and stick around.
It's so interesting how many English learners get so caught up in memorizing every single grammar rule.
Yeah.
And they kind of forget that language is really more about communication,
Right.
not perfection.
That's so true. I remember when I was learning Spanish, I would spend hours trying to memorize verb tables.
Right.
And it just felt like a chore.
Yeah.
It wasn't until I started actually using the language in conversations that it began to click.
Exactly. And that's where this idea of personalizing your grammar learning really comes in. When you connect grammar rules to your own experiences and your own interests, it makes it so much easier to remember them and then apply them naturally.
Okay, so let's say someone is feeling a little overwhelmed by all the grammar rules out there. Where's a good place to start?
Well, I think instead of diving headfirst into the most complex structures, why not start with what you're already comfortable with?
Okay.
Think about those basic building blocks of English grammar. Present simple tense, past simple tense, basic sentence structures.
Right.
Like subject, verb, object.
It's like making sure the foundation of your house is strong before you start adding extra floors.
Exactly. Once you have that solid foundation, you can start building on it.
Okay.
So, for instance, let's say you're pretty good at present simple tense. You could start adding adverbs of frequency to your sentences. Instead of just saying, I eat breakfast, you could say, I usually eat breakfast at 7 a.m. It's a small tweak.
Right.
But it adds more detail and nuance to your language.
That's a great point. You're not just memorizing a rule, you're actually using it to express yourself in a more precise way.
Exactly.
But how can we make this process of personalizing grammar even more engaging?
Well, one technique I found really helpful is using a grammar journal.
Okay, I've heard of vocabulary journals, but a grammar journal is a new one for me.
It's really quite simple. The idea is to choose one specific grammar point you want to focus on each week.
Okay.
So let's say you're working on conditional sentences.
Okay.
Throughout the week, whenever you encounter a conditional sentence, maybe in a book, a conversation, jot it down in your journal.
So you're basically collecting real-life examples of how the grammar is being used in context.
Exactly. And then the key is to take those examples and create your own personalized sentences using the same structure.
Mm-hmm.
So instead of just copying a sentence from a textbook, you're actively engaging with the grammar and making it relevant to your own life.
I love that idea. It's like taking those abstract grammar rules and turning them into something tangible and meaningful.
Right.
It's like taking ownership of the language.
Right. It's no longer just some rule in a textbook. It's something you're using to express your own thoughts and ideas. And the more you do that, the more natural and intuitive the grammar will become.
Speaking of putting grammar into practice, I think one of the biggest challenges for English learners is actually speaking. Even if you understand the rules, it can be so intimidating to actually use them in conversations.
Oh, absolutely. Speaking is a skill that takes practice just like anything else. But there are some strategies you can use to help you boost your confidence and fluency.
Okay, I'm all ears. What are some of your top tips?
Well, one surprisingly effective technique is recording yourself speaking. I know it might sound a little awkward at first, but trust me, it's really helpful. You can read a short paragraph, practice a dialogue, even just talk about your day, and then listen back to the recording and notice any areas where you're hesitating or making mistakes.
It's like having your own personal language coach.
Exactly.
You can pinpoint those areas where you need to focus your practice.
Exactly. Another tip is to try narrating your day in English. It doesn't matter if you're cooking dinner, walking the dog, or just sitting at your desk. Describe what you're doing, what you're seeing, what you're thinking, all in English. It's a great way to get comfortable forming sentences spontaneously.
I love that it's like turning everyday life into a grammar practice session.
Exactly.
And it's something you can do anywhere, anytime, without any special equipment.
Precisely. And if you want to take it a step further, try simulating different scenarios. Imagine you're ordering food at a restaurant, asking for directions, or making small talk at a party.
That's a great idea. You're essentially creating those real-life situations where you need to use specific grammar points.
Exactly. It's all about preparation and practice. The more you rehearse those common scenarios, the more confident you'll feel when you encounter them in real life.
Okay, so we're getting lots of great tips for practicing grammar. But let's face it, we all make mistakes when we're learning a new language. How can we deal with that fear of making mistakes and actually turn it into a learning opportunity?
That's such an important point. Mistakes are inevitable, but they don't have to be something to be afraid of. In fact, they can be some of our best teachers.
So how can we shift our mindset and start seeing mistakes as stepping stones rather than roadblocks?
I think the first step is to simply acknowledge that mistakes are a natural part of the process. Everyone makes them, even native speakers.
That's reassuring to hear. I think sometimes we put so much pressure on ourselves to be perfect, and that just makes the fear of making mistakes even worse.
Absolutely. We need to be kind to ourselves and recognize that mistakes are simply evidence that we're learning and growing.
So how can we actually use our mistakes to improve our grammar?
One really helpful strategy is to keep a mistake log. Whenever you notice yourself making a grammar mistake, whether it's in speaking or writing, jot it down in your log.
Okay, so we're basically keeping track of our errors.
Right.
What do we do with that information?
Well, the next step is to figure out why you made the mistake. Was it a simple slip-up? Or is there a gap in your understanding of the grammar rule? Once you identify the root cause, you can focus your energy on addressing it.
I see. It's like turning each mistake into a mini lesson.
Exactly. And as you keep track of your mistakes over time, you might start to notice patterns. Maybe you keep making the same mistake with a particular tense, or you struggle with word order in a specific type of sentence.
Those patterns can then guide your future grammar practice. You know exactly what areas need the most attention.
Precisely. And don't forget to celebrate your progress as you start to see fewer and fewer entries in your mistake log. It's a clear sign that your grammar is improving.
That's such a motivating thought. It's like seeing the light at the end of the grammar tunnel.
Yeah.
You know?
It really is encouraging to see those improvements. And as we're talking about turning, negatives into positives, another strategy that can be super helpful is creating your own personal grammar dictionary.
Well, that's interesting. I've heard of like keeping a vocabulary notebook to learn new words.
Right.
But I've never thought about applying that concept to grammar. Tell me more.
Well, think of it like this. You have your go-to dictionary for looking up new words.
Yeah.
Right, but what about those pesky grammar structures that always seem to trip you up? A grammar dictionary can be your personalized quick reference guide for those tricky points.
I'm intrigued. How would someone actually go about creating a grammar dictionary?
It's pretty straightforward. You can use a notebook, index cards, even a digital document. The key is to dedicate each page or entry to a specific grammar structure. Let's say you're working on the dreaded reported speech.
Okay.
You'd have a page titled Reported Speech, and then you'd break it down.
Okay, so you'd start by outlining the basic rules, right? Like how the verb tenses change when you're reporting what someone said.
Exactly, and don't forget those little details, like using that to introduce reported statements. Then here's where the magic happens. Instead of just copying generic examples from a textbook, add your own personalized sentences.
Ooh, I like that. So instead of a bland example like, he said he was tired, it could be something like, my neighbor told me she was exhausted after her yoga class.
Exactly. The more you can relate the grammar point to your own life, the more likely you are to remember it. And to make your dictionary even more usable, include a section for common mistakes.
So it's like a personalized cheat sheet that evolves as you learn and grow. I love it.
This conversation has me thinking about reading. We all know it's important for language learning, but sometimes I feel like I'm just skimming the surface and not really absorbing the grammar.
I know what you mean. It's easy to get caught up in the storyline and not pay close attention to the mechanics of the language, but with a little conscious effort, you can turn reading into a powerful grammar-building activity.
Okay, I'm all ears. How do we shift from passive reading to actively engaging with the grammar?
Well, first things first, choose texts that are appropriate for your level. If you're constantly struggling with unfamiliar vocabulary, you're less likely to notice the grammar structures being used. Right. We don't want to get bogged down in vocabulary and miss the grammar forest for the trees.
Exactly. Once you have a text that's a good fit, try focusing on one specific grammar point you're currently working on. Let's say it's conditional sentences. As you read, actively look for those sentences and maybe even highlight them or jot them down in a notebook.
So it's like a grammar treasure hunt. You're training your eyes to spot those structures in their natural habitat.
I like that analogy. And once you've identified those sentences, take a closer look at them. How are they formed? Why are they used in that particular context? What nuances do they convey?
To take it a step further, you could even try rewriting those sentences using different tenses or structures.
That's a fantastic idea. It's like a grammar workout for your brain. You're manipulating the language, experimenting with different forms, and seeing how those changes affect the meaning of the sentence.
I'm starting to see reading in a whole new light. It's not just about enjoying the story, it's an opportunity to really dive deep into the inner workings of the language. Speaking of resources, we live in a digital age with tons of apps and websites designed to help us learn languages. How can we use technology effectively to improve our grammar without becoming overly reliant on it?
That's a great question. Technology can be an amazing tool, but it's important to use it strategically. Let's start with grammar checkers, like Grammarly. They can be super helpful for catching those little mistakes we might miss.
Right, it's like having a digital proofreader on call 24/7.
Exactly. But here's the key. Don't just blindly accept their suggestions. Try to understand why something is flagged as incorrect.
So it's not just about fixing the error, it's about learning from it.
Precisely. It's like having a teacher who not only points out your mistakes, but also explains the reasoning behind them.
What about language exchange apps?
Yeah.
I know a lot of learners use them to connect with native speakers, but how can they be used specifically for grammar improvement?
Language exchange apps are fantastic for putting your grammar knowledge to the test in real-life conversations when you're chatting with someone. Pay attention to how they're using grammar structures. Don't be afraid to ask questions if something is unclear.
It's like having a built-in grammar tutor, and you're not just learning from textbooks or exercises, you're seeing how real people use grammar in everyday communication.
Exactly. And of course, there are tons of online grammar quizzes and exercises available. These can be a great way to reinforce your learning and identify areas where you need more practice. But choose quizzes that focus on applying the grammar rules in context rather than just rote memorization.
So technology can be a valuable supplement to our grammar learning journey, but it shouldn't replace good old-fashioned effort and practice. Which brings us to self-assessment. How can we track our progress and identify areas for improvement without getting discouraged?
Self-assessment is crucial. It's like checking your map to make sure you're still on the right track. One effective strategy is to set specific measurable goals for yourself.
So instead of just aiming to get better at grammar, you'd set a target like, I want to be able to use the past perfect tense confidently in conversations.
Exactly. And then you need to figure out how you'll measure your progress. Maybe you decide to record yourself speaking for a few minutes each week and listen back to see how accurately and naturally you're using the past perfect.
You can also look back at old writing samples or journal entries to see how your grammar has evolved over time.
That's a great idea. And remember to celebrate those small wins along the way. Every improvement, no matter how small, is a step in the right direction.
I love that it's so easy to focus on what we're still struggling with, but it's equally important to acknowledge how far we've come. Speaking of progress as intermediate learners, what are some bigger goals we should be aiming for?
One of the most exciting milestones for intermediate learners is achieving fluency.
Fluency, that magical ability to communicate effortlessly and comfortably. It can feel like a distant dream, especially when you're still worried about making mistakes.
I understand that feeling, but it's important to remember that fluency doesn't mean speaking perfectly. It's about being able to express yourself naturally and keep the conversation flowing even if you stumble occasionally.
So it's more about focusing on the overall message and less about obsessing over every single grammar rule.
Exactly. Think of it like learning to drive when you first start. You're hyper-focused on all the rules and controls, but as you gain experience, driving becomes more automatic and enjoyable.
I love that analogy. So how can we apply this driving concept to speaking English more fluently?
One key tip is to focus on speaking at a natural pace. Even if you make a mistake or two, don't be afraid to pause, rephrase, or even use synonyms if you can't think of the exact word you need.
It's like taking a detour. If you encounter a roadblock, you might not arrive at your destination in the most direct way, but you'll still get there eventually.
Precisely. And the more you practice speaking, the better you'll become at navigating those detours smoothly and effortlessly. Now, we've been talking a lot about individual strategies, but language learning doesn't have to be a solo journey.
Right. Language is inherently social. How can we involve others in our quest for grammatical mastery?
Finding a study buddy can be a game changer.
Like a grammar gym partner, someone to motivate you, hold you accountable, and practice with.
Exactly. You can practice speaking together, quiz each other, exchange grammar journals, and even correct each other's work.
And if you don't have a study buddy in real life, there are tons of online communities dedicated to English language learners.
Absolutely. These online forums are a fantastic way to connect with other learners from around the world, ask questions, share tips, and get feedback on your progress.
It's so reassuring to know that you're not alone in this journey. And if you're looking for more face-to-face interaction, Many cities have language meetups or conversation clubs.
Those are great options too. They provide a relaxed and supportive environment to practice speaking with other learners and native speakers.
We've covered a lot of ground today, from personalizing grammar to embracing mistakes, utilizing technology, and finding ways to make learning fun and social. But I think there's one more crucial element we need to touch on.
I agree. Let's talk about how to make grammar practice not just effective, but enjoyable.
Because, let's be honest, nobody wants to spend hours staring at grammar textbooks and feeling miserable.
Exactly. The good news is that grammar practice doesn't have to be boring. One of the best ways to make it fun is to integrate it into activities you already enjoy.
So instead of treating grammar like a chore, you're weaving it into your favorite hobbies.
Precisely. If you're a music lover, pay close attention to the lyrics of your favorite English songs. Notice how they use different tense, sentence structures and word choices to create rhythm and meaning. You could even try rewriting a verse or two using a different grammar structure to see how it changes the feel of the song.
That's a really cool idea. And for film buffs, choose a scene from a movie and analyze the dialogue. Pay attention to how the characters use grammar to express their personalities, their relationships, and their emotions.
It's like turning your entertainment into a secret grammar lesson.
I love that. And of course, there are tons of grammar-themed games and apps out there, from crossword puzzles to word games. There are so many fun ways to challenge yourself and reinforce your learning.
The key is to find what works for you and keeps you engaged and motivated, because when you enjoy the process, learning becomes so much easier and more effective.
This has been such an eye-opening conversation. I feel like I have a whole new toolkit for tackling English grammar. And on that note, I think it's time for us to wrap up part 2 of this episode. But don't worry, we have one more segment coming up where we'll dive into an essential aspect of mastering any language, developing your own unique voice. So stay tuned.
Welcome back to Chat Like a Native. We've been exploring all kinds of techniques to help you personalize your grammar learning and move towards fluency. But now let's talk about something really exciting.
Okay.
Developing your own unique voice in English.
This is something I'm really passionate about. We can spend hours perfecting grammar rules.
Right.
But at the end of the day, language is about expressing yourself authentically.
Absolutely. Think of grammar like the framework of a house. It provides the structure and support.
Okay.
But it's your personal touch that makes it a home. You get to choose the colors, the furniture, the decorations that reflect your individual style.
I love that analogy.
Mm-hmm.
So how can we start to infuse our own personality and style into our English?
One of the most powerful tools for developing your voice is writing.
Okay.
Specifically journaling. It's like having a conversation with yourself on paper, a space where you can experiment, explore, and discover how you want to express yourself in English.
Journaling can be so freeing. You don't have to worry about being perfect or impressing anyone. It's just you and your thoughts.
Exactly. And as you write, try playing with different tones and styles. Write a paragraph in a formal tone, then rewrite it in a casual conversational style. Notice how your word choices and sentence structures shift to reflect those different voices.
It's like trying on different clothes to see what fits your personality best.
Right. You can also experiment with different genres of writing. Try writing a short story, a poem, a song, even a blog post. The more you play with language, the more comfortable you'll become shaping it to your own unique style.
This has been such an insightful conversation. I feel like we've really shifted the perspective on grammar from a set of rigid rules to a flexible tool for self-expression.
I couldn't agree more. For everyone listening, remember this. You are not just learning English. You're creating your own unique voice within it. Embrace the journey, explore the possibilities, and most importantly, have fun.
That's the perfect note to end on. And that's a wrap for today's deep dive into personalized grammar learning. Remember, it's not about perfection, it's about progress. Keep practicing, keep experimenting, and keep those conversations flowing.
Until next time, happy learning.